Today I'm speaking with Jamin Coller. Jamin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Tim.
I'm really looking forward to hearing your story. You are one of the most interesting people I think I've had on here. Your story is both between your parents, your family of origin background, and your background. It's quite interesting. So I'm looking forward to hearing the details. But just to give a quick bio before we get started, Jamin is from Iowa, and he and his wife Wendy and their six children live in Sacramento, California. He was a worship pastor for 25 years, and his dad was a pastor as well in a church based on Bill Gothard's basic life principles. Almost feel like I need a trigger warning for that these days. He was homeschooled for most of his childhood. He is the author of the upcoming book coming out early next year, right?
Yes.
Called Dear Evangelicals, Sincere Questions from a Reluctant Deconstructionist. I'll have the link, the Amazon link beneath our video for that. So please go take a look and buy that. More information about what he's been thinking through in terms of that book is on two websites, findinggoddespitereligion.com and almostoccult.com. In addition to all that, Jamin, of course, with his worship background, he is an accomplished musician. He does teach piano on YouTube at Learn Piano Live. I'll have the links for that and some other websites beneath the video. So please go like and subscribe, especially if you're learning the piano and can glean from him there. Besides what I know about you so far, Jamin, what else can you tell us about yourself?
Well, this book kind of like I feel like it forced itself on me. I'm hoping that when I'm done with all the writing and stuff, I can get back to this other passion that I had of learning how to fly. So I took several flight lessons, and then ran out of money because that's a really expensive hobby. But that was a lot of fun. I was almost up to my solo flight last time I left off. So hopefully I'll get back to that because that was a ton of fun.
That's awesome. I'm jealous of that. That's really cool. Where would you fly, just locally in California, or would you be flying like cross country?
Just in the air. It's awesome to be up there. So yeah, wherever. I have I imagine myself flying my kids to Disneyland. That seems like that would be a lot of fun. But I don't know. Just
Yeah,
just being up there is cool.
that'd be real cool. I'm here just north of Atlanta, and every once in a while we'll catch a hot air balloon that's in the evening just floating over. It seems like a
Awesome.
pretty cool way to see the
Yeah.
sunset.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you introducing yourself. We're obviously here to hear your story. I encourage people to go back to the earliest days and kind of tell us, where this started from the earliest memories you have of how did you get exposed to Christianity?
Yeah. Man, that from the very beginning, before I was born, my dad got his first church. And so by the time I came along, he knew all of the right ways to raise kids. So I had a perfect childhood. There's not much to talk about.
Nice.
So I accepted Jesus into my heart at the age of 5, whatever that means. And like a good evangelical, I spent the rest of my life trying to recommit my life to God because I kept screwing it up. Um, by nothing large, but just I think most Christians live with a latent residual guilt that keeps tracking you down and going, well, maybe you're not really saved. Maybe you should just recommit your life to Christ. And then you go to camps and retreats and services, and they all encourage you. Maybe you should recommit your life to Christ. Yeah, I should recommit my life to Christ. So I've been saved at least dozens of times. Praise the Lord. And so yeah, that's I mean, I've when did I invite Jesus into my heart? Like that's it started at age 5, and then I just kept trying, and then so it's kind of funny just thinking about that experience because as a Christian, my experience was on one hand, I'm told you have to believe harder. You're already saved. And if you think that you're not saved, then that's a lack of faith. So you need to just believe that you're saved, believe harder. Like, okay, yeah, you're right. Of course. I invited you to my heart. This thing's a done deal. I'm saved. I'm going to heaven. It's over. And now I can move on. And then you go back the next week and they're like, have you ever sinned? Well, then that sin is living with you. So you need to recommit your life to Christ. Oh, yeah, I'm barely saved. I need to so that back and forth is frustrating. So I think that's one of the things. There's a lot of them. That's one of the things, though, that as a Christian, looking back on my time in the evangelical fundamentalist church, that's one of the things that is like, man, that was really frustrating, and I experienced that frustration, but living in it, I think like not to be disrespectful to Christians, but it's much like I think living in an abusive relationship. Like while you're in it, you're just in it. Like this isn't weird. This is just life. This is the way that it goes. But then when you look back on it, like, man, that was kind of messed up, that I was just constantly in this, I don't have enough faith to believe that I'm a Christian, and also I don't have enough faith to stop sinning, and it's just always back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and no matter what, it's always my fault. That's the only one consistent thing throughout my religious experience is, everything that you're feeling that's negative, it's not because you keep going to a service that tells you that you should feel negative. It's not that. It's your fault.
Yeah.
So
I've
that
heard too
was,
the corollary that God's love is unconditional, but it's got so many conditions. And it feels very
yeah.
true.
Yeah, I mean, oof, there's all kinds of things like that where, and I now looking back, there's this whole list of them, and I tried to list them out in my book, and I'm not smart enough or have a good enough memory to remember all of them. There's a lot of things where, like, the things that we say as Christians are deeply anti-Christian, but you don't realize it until you like fully have permission to believe that thing. Like currently, for me, like God is everywhere. Like that's what we say, but then we say that like people are have walked away from God. But God's over there. Or like, if you don't have the Bible, where's your moral compass? Well, if God is everywhere, like you got the same Holy Spirit you had before. He's right there. He's fully accessible. Um, so the God is everywhere thing. I'm sorry, what was yours again?
I was just saying that there's God loves you unconditionally,
Yeah.
but there's so many conditions.
Right. Yep. Unconditional love. Like, yeah, like as a platitude, fully on board with that. But then as you attend church, you realize, oh, I'm not meeting the conditions of the unconditional love. And I feel terrible about that. And I think maybe that sentence might be the summary of most people's entire Christian experience, subconsciously or consciously, is I feel terrible about that. And I think that might be, speaking to my Jewish friends now. It seems like that phrase is conspicuous to them. Like, you guys aren't like us because you're so focused on feeling bad about everything, and you don't realize it until you get out and you go like, oh yeah, a lot of that experience was just someone saying, don't you feel terrible? You're like, oh yeah, I do feel terrible. Like, I've got an answer for that terrible feeling that you've always had. Like, actually, I just had that feeling because you told me that I did. But that's the way those, man, more unintentionally disrespectful terms here. But not saying this is true about Christianity necessarily, but it is true about all fake made up things, where they create a problem for you and then they sell you the solution for that problem.
Yeah.
And so maybe Christianity is different. Maybe Christianity is totally right. I would hope that's true in a lot of cases. But it does seem to fit into a category that is frustrating in that way.
Yeah, for sure. So before we dive into all the nuances of your belief and your time with the Lord, can you give us a little bit of an earlier background of your dad? Because that's an interesting piece of this, even though it may not be directly part of your story, but it's the background is crucial. Who
Yeah.
is your dad and what did he do?
Yeah, and that's another one of those things where like I don't have enough space from it currently to have any kind of like objective sense of it. It was normal to me, but some of the things that stand out to other people when I tell my story is that he became a pastor when he was 25, which seems kind of young to have your own congregation, no associate pastor, and very little or no oversight from the pseudo denomination, which I again don't mean that disrespectfully either. They don't consider themselves a denomination. They consider themselves a fellowship of churches, but they're called a denomination. So I think the fellowship of churches means, sign up and we won't really look too much at what you're doing. Just you'll have fellowship with other pastors. So it's kind of like a club. But then if you ask the question, there's no accountability for your pastors. Like, oh, well, no, we're a denomination. Okay, so that was the group that he was a part of, a fellowship of churches, and he was pretty young. He was before that he was in the film A Thief in the Night, and he was the piano playing pastor that got raptured while he was mowing his lawn. So from
Wow.
age 19, he was officially recognized by the world as the guy who was right all along. And I don't think he ever
Wow.
broke character later on in his life. As far as I've ever seen him, he's always been the guy that's right.
People wouldn't believe what was going to happen. until the flood actually arrived and took them all away. So shall my coming be. 2 men will be working together in the fields. One will be taken, the other left. So be prepared, for you know not what day your Lord is coming. The Bible says in the twinkling of an eye. Millions of people will suddenly disappear, leave this earth to meet their Lord, and a shocked world will discover suddenly that what the Bible said was true. So Christian, be alert. And friend, if you haven't given your life to Christ, do it. And do it now, because the rapture will come and Christ will return. It says in the Bible that he will come as a thief in the night. One of these days, it could be any minute now, Christ is going to come back for his own. After that, it's going to be pretty awful here on earth.
You really believe all that?
Yes, I do.
And if you have your own church and very little or zero accountability, that you can apparently live a long time in that world, where you're just always right, and the people who disagree with you are falling away from the Lord. So
is he still a pastor?
I don't know. I work hard not to keep tabs on them because it's not great for my mental health to indulge that persistence in my brain. But I think that he may have retired. But they're all. I haven't talked with them in 3 years. Last I talked with them, they let me know I was officially no longer their son. So, and I'm hoping that maybe by the time this airs or sometime in the future before we all die, we'll be able to reconcile that. So I don't, I'm not necessarily hopeless about the situation, but it's, as far as I know, they're still fully into whatever they were into. So if he's not if he's not pastoring, I'm sure he's finding some way to help the world in a similar way he was before.
Yeah, well, I'll probably ask a few more questions about that when we get to that point of the timeline, so to speak. But feel free to take us back then. Could you tell us a little bit more about when you did place your faith in Christ and you did recommit yourself? Just what is, for someone, say, is a Buddhist or someone else watching that's not from our kind of background, what does the gospel mean? What did it mean for you to be saved, and what were you being saved from? And what was God doing by saving you?
Yeah, I mean, we all have original sin. So there was that thing. I was cursed for being a descendant of Eve, and the only way to cover over that sin was to ask Jesus to come into my heart, whatever that meant. At age 5, it made perfect sense. And then God would no longer hold that original sin against me, because he would no longer see me and my horrible self when he looked at me. He would just see the beauty of Jesus and his death on the cross and his resurrection. And so because Jesus stood in for me, then I got to go to heaven. This is another one of those things where, looking back, that seems pretty deeply destructive, in that God can't love me. I'm not good enough to be loved by my heavenly Father. I need someone else to stand in and be like, nah, don't look at him. Look at me. Aren't I pretty? I'm your son. Look at Jesus instead. And then God would be like, yeah, Jesus, you can bring your +1. So that
and you're
was
literally so bad that you have to be someone has to be tortured, not just punished, but tortured for you.
Yes. I mean, none of this is, again, it's just normal life when you're there. So none of that really stands out. You're just so grateful, as you're taught to be over and over and over. So grateful that Jesus would be tortured for you, because it was going to be you that was tortured otherwise. So you don't think about the absurdity of the proposition. It's just gratitude. I mean, I think that's the normal fight or flight, fawn, what are the other F's are. That's the normal response to, like, hey, you're going to burn in hell forever. Like, okay, is there any way out? Well, as a matter of fact, yes, it only costs 10% of your income. So yeah, that was, I think that was what I was being saved from. And then we have these other kind of hard to understand verses that talk about continually being saved, and there's words in there like regeneration and stuff like that, where you're like, you're saved, but you gotta keep on moving. You can't just stop. It's not just because you're saved doesn't mean you get to stay saved. And then of course you have these huge Arminian and Calvinist splits over what all that means. But pretty much everybody agrees, like, if you're doing bad stuff, you're in trouble, no matter how you want to cut it theologically. So I think we were on the Armenian side, and so, well, I guess it doesn't really matter what all that means, but yeah, you got to keep moving, you got to keep trying. If you see yourself messing up, you should rededicate yourself to Christ, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you weren't saved, but better to be safe than sorry. And so that was a lot of my what's that?
So there's too much at stake to not be sure.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And so you might as well just recommit one more time, and then be grateful that no matter how many times you need to recommit your life, he's still willing to cover over your pathetic, ugly, despicable, filthy rags soul. Because you're really horrible. And if you look deep enough, you know it. You know you're terrible, right?
It's interesting when you talk about the whole repeating the process. I've had a few people point out, I think very astutely over the years, that there really is like a spiritual OCD. And even if your personality doesn't lean toward that, and you never kind of be, the kind of person that has to flip on a light switch over and over, or check the door lock over and over. But just like there's still a spiritual OCD that comes into the equation, where you're, like you said, trying to make sure and double check you're saved. But even if those are like these really intense moments of just going back to the cross and kneeling, saying the prayer, get that almost like that depth of depravity up to the mountaintop experience, where you're sure again that you're on fire for the Lord and he's the king of your life. Even in the midst of those high points and valleys, there's all these little teeny micro moments of like, oh, I sinned, like, oh, I sinned again, oh, I sinned again. And even the presumptuous sins, like, did I just do that really nice, good, righteous thing out of pride? Did I just pray that prayer, but someone saw me and Jesus said, pray in your closet? Did I just do that so they would hear me pray, or did I actually like pray to God? And you end up just constantly checking yourself. And even the Bible talks a lot about examining yourself, that if you would judge yourself, you would not be judged, and therefore you need to judge yourself over and over and over on a daily basis. Examine your heart to see what sins are there. And you do end up in a spiritual OCD cycle where you have to always look in the mirror and say, how did I mess up today? How did I mess up this hour? And of course, when you add very basic human dynamics like puberty and just growth and hormones and everything, you end up adding a whole bunch of dynamics where you feel guilty just for being in your own skin. It's really intense.
Yeah. You're taught to feel guilty for being in your own sin, because I think, in my experience, most of the people that I knew and talked to kind of felt like, okay, but like, what if I don't ever sin? Like, aren't I kind of good if I don't ever sin? I mean, that was the question for the guy that came to Jesus, right? In the Bible, he's like, okay, but I've never done any sinning. And Jesus' answer is the same answer as the church's answer. I don't think this is true in reality, but in Christian theology, Jesus' answer is the same as the church's, which is, yeah, that's still not good enough. Perfect isn't good enough. And so, yeah, you've got to constantly be dealing with this, like, you always left the oven on, and so you always have to be like, okay, well, I got to go back and double check. Okay, turn the oven off, and then you can walk out for a second, but then I think I left the oven on. You got to keep going back and turning it off, like you're saying. And layered on top of that is the emotional, personal, interrelational guilt of Jesus is your best friend, and each time that you sin, you're taking your best friend and re-nailing him to the cross. Which is, I mean, if that doesn't induce guilt in a normal human being with like a normal amount of humanity in them, I don't know what would. Like, yeah, the guy who gave me everything, who loves me more than anybody else, who loves me when I'm unlovable. Oof, that's a tough sentence right there. But that guy, I just because I want to, every time I want to do something that he doesn't approve of, I'm renailing him to the cross. And once again, like if this was the only sin that existed in the whole universe, he'd have to die on the cross for this sin right here. I'm doing that to him. That should make you feel like a piece of crap, and it does. It's successful.
Yeah, and I think even on the positive side of it, of saying, all right, I'm not sinning in this moment, but like, well, what are you doing for the sake of righteousness and disciplining your flesh? Like, there was always the intense pressure in my world to just be praying more and more for the lost. Like they would constantly tell stories of, Uncle so and so prayed for his brother to get saved, but he had to pray for 30 years, but he prayed
Yeah,
every single day for 30 years, and then his brother
yeah,
got saved. It's like,
yeah,
aren't isn't so and so's salvation worth enough that you can pray every single day for 30
yeah,
years? And what are you doing to, like, you can take all day long to focus on your stuff, on your schooling, on your work, on your hobbies. You can't take
yeah,
30 minutes for God. Are you kidding me? He gave you the entire day.
yeah,
And the intense pressure that even if you're not sinning, you're still not doing enough to be self-disciplined. And I remember there was some quote, I can't even remember exactly how it goes, but something like, I'm so busy today that I have to spend at least 4 hours in prayer before I even start.
yeah.
That's
Right,
crazy.
right. Yep. Well, and you got to do the same thing with your finances too, because
Yep.
I don't have enough money to not tithe. Like that's the testimony. And testimony is a funny word too, because like in court, your testimony, like the testimony is the guy from that one side who's trying to prove that one side true, and he's going to try to exclude all the stuff that doesn't help out with that one side. It's not like he's presenting the person who's giving their testimony is just trying to present general truth. Like they've got a side. But in church, like you hear testimonies like this just is one more proof of God's faithfulness. But then it's the same thing. Like that's a one-sided. If you took all the people who prayed every single day for their relative or every single day for, man, these are such dark topics, but prayed for their friend's cancer or prayed for whatever. You just take all those people and you let all of them testify. No one's going to walk out a Christian. And again, I don't mean to be flippant or dismissive, but if you take the 1 out of 1,000 that got answered, and then you let everybody testify, well, yeah, I prayed for every single day for 30 years and nothing. The guy died and went to hell. You're gonna have 100 of those, and you're gonna have one of them that was like, oh yeah, this guy converted, and that's how I know that God always answers prayer. Like, except for the other 99 times. And that doesn't prove that God isn't real. That doesn't prove anything. It just proves that the testimony that you're getting is biased, as you would expect it to be, but you just have to acknowledge that. And I feel like that spirit right there is probably the spirit of my deconstruction, at least, and the spirit of the book, which is just like, let's just be honest about this. I'm not saying Christianity isn't right. I'm not saying there is no God. I don't need to say any of that. I just need to say this testimony is a biased testimony, and it doesn't really prove what we're saying that it proves.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to get to that shortly. Before we do, I just have a few more questions about sort of your background. I want to make sure we kind of paint the
Yeah.
solid picture. Can you tell us about your meeting, how you met your wife and that story? I know
Yeah.
that's kind of an interesting part of it. And then how did you all end up moving into, the worship pastor phase of life?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That is a very long story. Let me see if I can sum up and I'll let you jump in with questions along the way. So I was homeschooled from kindergarten through 11th grade. Then my mom took over a Christian school that met on the campus of my dad's church. So it was a K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade, a maximum of 120 students. So it was a really small school. 6 people in my graduating class. One of those people was my wife, Wendy. And so, yeah, we of course got married because that's what you do with the first eligible person that you meet. It's worked out for us so far. We're celebrating 20 years this year
Nice.
together.
Congrats.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's not always a horrific story, but it's at least a scary story. So yeah, so we got married at age 23, I think it was, and then the worship pastor role thing was just like that was kind of a given. My brother and I've always had this annoying streak, a rebellious streak. I would call it a curious streak, but it depends on your perspective. Of just like, can we be honest? And like, this thing's weird, right? Like, if I'm just real honest, like this thing doesn't make sense, but I'm supposed to go on stage and say that it makes sense, but it doesn't really, and that feels yucky to me. Um, and so
Like the
that was
lyrics of your songs?
Oh, well, sure, or the preaching or the whatever. Yeah, just like making claims about God that seemed weird and seemed like they didn't make sense. And
Hmm.
I also had the sense that like the world that I grew up in was so one-sided. Like there wasn't you don't go out and question, and that's a whole other can of worms that takes up a 50 pages in the book. Like the anti-intellectualism, like don't go talk to those bad people. And it's scriptural too. I mean the Bible says don't be led astray by, people who think differently than you essentially. So there you've got good reasons within the leadership and within the Bible to not go out and find out things. But even in this insulated world that I lived in, every now and then something would creep in. They'd be like, wait a second, this doesn't seem right. This seems weird. At least it seems like I don't know for sure, but I'm supposed to go out and teach it as if I know it for sure. So that was kind of my personality, was this annoying guy that like, man, you're talented, you could really become something for the Lord, you could really make a difference in the world, but you just have this rebellious streak because you're prideful. You think that you know better than God. Stuff like
Hmm.
that, where it's just like, oh, that's what a question means. So,
I've got to just
yeah.
applaud you for even having those doubts and questions, because I acknowledge that I had some too, but I had this thing in my mind, I guess you'd say, that just I always chalked it up to, yeah, it's an apparent discrepancy, it's a supposed
Right.
issue, but
Yeah.
number one, you've always got the glorious the knowledge of, and the glories of heaven. He will
Yeah.
unfold to you the beautiful tapestry of what his whole workings have been and what the theology has meant, even when you didn't understand it. But also, even here on earth, I always thought, you know what, there's some really brilliant theologians, there's brilliant
Yeah.
pastors and
Right.
PhD teachers at Bible college and seminary. They surely had the dark night of the soul with their faith. They surely went through times of, this doesn't make sense. And yet, over the years, their faith strengthened, and they're now
Yeah.
in their 60s, 70s, 80s, preaching firmly, writing theology books, and expounding the word of God. Something in their minds, they know more than me. And it was this almost like this example, like when you learn more, when you learn
Yep.
more Greek and Hebrew, when you learn better theology, when you're just exposed to the deeper thinkers of times, such as the Puritans and Charles Spurgeon and all the old, the
Yep.
good people, the really the people that truly have the meat of the word just in their blood, as it were. When
Right.
when you're thinking their thoughts after them, and you're thinking the Bible,
Yeah.
you're just breathing it in and out. You will eventually get to a point where these things will either, number one, drop, or you will be more equipped than ever to say, I still don't understand. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Either
Yeah.
way, you wait till you're smarter, or you wait till
Yeah.
till you're in heaven, but it's not ultimately an issue. And for some reason,
Yeah.
that was what kind of kept me from moving forward. It sounds like you were brave enough to ask questions a lot earlier.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So two things on that. One, thank you, but I feel like I was just given a broken brain, and it wasn't like any act of bravery on my part. I feel like I was destined to um continue to wonder and to be honest about the answers I was given. And that's not a thing that everyone is given. So I don't know that I had a choice in this. I feel like I can't force myself to believe. Like I want to believe. I'm giving myself over to belief. Please take me over. That's where I want to be. But I don't have a choice in the matter. I just can't believe. And so then the question after that is, well, do I lie and say that I do believe when I don't? Or and there's a good defense for that. I mean, there's a nice big welcoming community. There's a lot to be lost by being honest with yourself. So, but I just don't have the personality that would endure that for very long. So I don't know that it's to my credit or my fault. I think I was born this way. Um,
Well, can I
but
clarify
then
just in terms of the timeline? When was the first time that you were seriously saying, "Uh-oh, like there's a serious splinter in my mind. This is a problem," versus just, I'm just working through some stuff. I just, just need to grow in my understanding of the word.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's kind of like one of those tipping point things. Like things pile up and everything's great until it's not, right? And like you're saying, there's this whole like just trust the experts. Like you think you're smarter than Josh McDowell? Really? Like that guy's a lawyer. That's debatable, but like here are really smart guys, and you're going to risk you're going to bet your eternal salvation on the fact that you think as a piano player you're smarter than C.S. Lewis? Really? Okay, well, if you want to put your eternal destiny in a debate between you and C.S. Lewis, go for it, buddy. Good luck with that. Like, oh, okay, yeah, good point. I'm not smarter than any of those guys. I know that for sure. So I'll trust them. I'll go with it. And that's been one of the major deep disappointments of this process for me is like when you actually finally do ask the question, like, okay, but this thing right here, this is weird, right? And then you go back to all those guys, like there aren't real answers to it, and the answers that are there in a lot of cases um, are more like, yeah, that's weird, but shut up, because there's people who are stupider than you and me, and they need more assurance. So we don't say the big truths out loud because that's going to lead people astray. So the dumb people need the you and me, the smart people, to not ask those questions, and that just feels incredibly condescending. And maybe they're right. Maybe 100% I'm wrong and they're right, and you and I currently right now, Tim, are putting people's souls in jeopardy. That could be, but again, my brain is just broken, and I can't bring myself to do that anymore. So
You
I'm
mentioned
kind
the
of stuck
word.
with it. Yeah.
No, I hear you. It's an interesting journey for sure. I love how you use the word weird. I think at least twice. One of the things that looking back at this whole thing, and I know I'm jumping ahead now to my deconversions part of it, but um, looking back, the Lord's table and circumcision, I should say, those two things together. But those two things really never seemed weird to me. And you think,
Tell
okay,
me, tell me
I
real quick,
believe
what's the Lord's table?
like the Eucharist, communion.
Oh,
So
okay, yeah,
you're eating, you're pretending to eat a dead man's body, you're pretending to drink a dead man's blood, dead and resurrected, but you're pretending to eat a guy that got killed, pretending to eat his body and drink his blood. And then with circumcision, you're saying, I believe in a God who likes to cut off the end of little boys' penises. And I like look at when I look back at that stuff, I'm like, what in the world was I thinking? I mean, there's more to it than that when you realize that for example, the Egyptians were doing that. The Egyptians were circumcising. The Egyptians had a pork taboo. They were doing this stuff long before the Israelites were doing it. And then you realize with the Eucharist that the Mithraeus and other people were doing this to, when you wanted to join the Mithraic temple for hundreds of years before Christ, you would have a meal of bread and beer or bread and wine, and you would get baptized in order to join their group. And it's like you see there's more to it, but even if you don't have that information yet, just to
yeah,
think, wait a second, isn't this a little bit weird?
yeah,
And it strikes me as but it's a great testimony to the fact that when you're in it young, which you've alluded to, when you're in it young and it's just your world,
yeah,
everyone's doing it. Everyone's saying this is the best life ever. This is the best worldview ever. This is the most accurate perception of reality, and this is going to end up in a great outcome for you in eternity. You just accept it and say, yeah, this is great. And but looking back, I'm like, what in the world?
yeah. Yeah. Well, and even recently, I've had a little different. I've had a change of opinion about like the parallel myths and stuff. But even if the myth. Well, now I've got to be. I don't want to disrespect you because I know you're smarter than I am on the myth stuff. But let's just grant to Christians all that. Like, okay, but all those guys were wrong, and Jesus was the right one. Like maybe that's true. There's no way to prove it's not true. So maybe that's true. Still, the world I grew up in said there's never been anyone like Jesus. Like no one else has been born to a virgin. No one else has done miracles. No one else had 12 disciples, was crucified and rose on the third day. Like this is a once in the universe story. And maybe he's the only one that's real about, but that sentence is not true. So that's a bummer. So like when you finally realize that, like, wait a second, you guys set me up for this deconstruction. Like, if this all is true, you should have started with that. You should have been like, you know what? Back then, everyone was born to a virgin. Everyone had 12 disciples. Everyone was dying and rising, and that was just the thing that was going on. And then Jesus comes along, and C.S. Lewis does this a little bit actually, and I got to respect him for that. He says, yeah, this stuff was all going on for thousands of years before Jesus, and then Jesus comes along. That was just like an appetite stimulant, right? And so that was creating this appetite so that when the real thing came along, then people would be like, yes, that's what we've been waiting for the whole entire time. So I at least respect his honesty on the topic of like, yeah, Jesus wasn't unique at all. I mean, he might have been perhaps a slightly unique conglomeration of all of these different things, but that wasn't a unique story. So I feel like if you're going to raise your kids Christian, at least raise them knowing all these other myths. And that's a dangerous proposition, because if you do that, it's going to make Jesus look credible. But if you don't do that and they ever find out any of that crap, then it's going to be a major struggle for them. So it seems like a more secure thing to just start with the C.S. Lewis version, which is Jesus isn't unique at all.
So just to add one more quick thing here about the mythology, I do a lot to protect my kids' minds. Their ages are between ages 3 and almost 9, so they're still young. They're very impressionable,
Yeah.
And I like to really make sure that they understand that this context that we're talking about. But some of it is like I think it's really important to go where you started with like, it isn't necessarily that they saw a story and then they copied it. It's just what everybody's doing. It's just this is just, everybody today is talking about Star Wars. Everyone's talking about the Avengers. Everyone's just got these motifs that are coming up. And so it's not that strange if something similar comes up. They're not necessarily copying it. It's just what we're all thinking about. Star Trek, all that kind of stuff with the fantasy worlds. But some of it's a little bit too close to home to not be like directly part of the story in a sense, at least in my opinion. When you look at, for example, Dionysius could turn water into wine. He did that for hundreds of years in the story before Jesus. He would, triumphantly ride into the town on a donkey. Zeus, the high god, he was known for crying tears that were drops of blood and water. Helios, the sun god, he had a purple robe and he had the sun rays around his head as a crown. Jesus gets the purple robe and a crown of thorns. Hermes, the Flash, the guy with the golden slippers that could run real fast. There's stories where he walks across the water to go save somebody. Jesus walks across the water to go save somebody. The list goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. But I think when you, like you're saying, when you do expose people to this, it inoculates them to the idea that Jesus is different, but it introduces the idea that maybe some of this stuff is them literally trying to say, we know the people in this group believe this particular set of characters, and we have somebody to replace them, but he's actually better. He's actually a better version of that, or even of actual ruling characters like Romulus. This guy, these people are people that you respect, and we have some that you can just respect even more. But the motifs are going to carry over. It's going to be very, very simple to flip to this new guy. But some of them are just so close, you can't help but think that there's number one, there's no way that's real. Like there's no way that's historical. But there's no way that didn't have some kind of direct one-for-one correlation. It's almost like they copied and pasted.
Yep. And that's where I'm a little less, because I want my audience to be evangelicals. I'm a little more open to granting them there is no one-for-one correlation, even though, like, as you read it, like, you just got to make up your own mind. Like, if you read that stuff, like, a lot of us are going to reach the same conclusion on this thing. But again, it doesn't prove anything.
So as you are as a parent, doing this stuff to protect your kids, I think one of the awesomest parts about this is you do inoculate them, like I said, against the sense of we have this one story and there's never been anything like it. But I think it also helps when you weave into that. Not only is this not an original story, but going back to what we said 5 minutes ago, it's also very absurd. Like, you really think this stuff happened. And I think the other thing this is going way broader, stepping back. But I think as Christians, it really points out that we weren't told about the context. And it's funny, when I was
Right.
growing up in church, they always preached, you can't read a verse unless you know the context. Like, you have to take it in context or
Right.
you'll mess it up. And
Right.
unless it's something real simple, like, a psalm, praise the Lord, praise the Lord. But if it's something like Paul's letters, you got to see the context of the whole paragraph
Right.
and the chapter and the whole book and where it is in the
Yes.
Bible. And yet you realize that they didn't give you the full context of the
Right.
Greco-Roman mystery cults, the Greco-Roman pantheon, and the Homeric epics, which is a huge part of this. And as well as,
Yeah.
for me, a big deal is the Book of Enoch. I
Mhm.
had never heard of Enoch apart from the few mentions in the Bible. And then as I do my own study, I find there's 200 quotes of the Book of Enoch in the New Testament. I'm like,
I know that.
that doesn't mean you have to deconvert, but why didn't you tell me?
Right. Yeah, and that's the frustration of like I think that's where a lot of the anger comes from in deconstruction, which also like that's totally reasonable. I can see how evangelicals would get defensive when they see someone angry about um so not that anyone's supposed to do something different, but I can see the conflict there. But yeah, that's the frustration of like why didn't you tell me all this stuff? Which is I think that's my goal with my own kids is like I want to leave them open to Christianity. Like me, I don't know what the answers are, and maybe this is true. And if it's true, if Christianity is true, I want my kids to be Christian. If Scientology is true, I want them to be Scientologists. If Mormonism is true, I hope that with all my heart that they become Mormons and I'm the only one in the family that doesn't make it into one of the 3 levels of heaven. I want them to make it into the highest level of heaven. Whatever the truth is, I want them to find that truth and to be happy and safe for all of eternity. But then given the context is the thing. Like if you become Mormon, here was Joseph Smith, here was his previous employment, here's his relationship with his dad, there's this thing with the gold tablets. I want them to have the full story, because when you go in the doors of the Mormon church, they don't tell you the backstory. They tell you, don't you feel like a piece of crap? Like, we've got a solution for that. And I mean, then you get converted, and then you've got all this buy-in. And so by the time you get to the gold tablets and all that other stuff and the polygamy and all this stuff, you're like, oh, well, how do I fit this into my life? Because this is my life and I can't change my life now. And so same thing with Scientology or Christianity, whatever. Like, I'm not opposed to them becoming any one of those things, but I do want them to know the backstory. So I
Can I
think
just
all
add to
that
with the thought of maybe, if you want your kids to be whatever, Scientologists or Mormons, if that's true. I
yeah,
think though there needs to be the other premise of like, if any of them are true, they're the ones making the supernatural claim. They need to have extraordinary evidence for it.
yeah,
And that's the issue, is like, it's not just, yeah, I want my kids to pursue the truth, even if it's this crazy story. It's like, yeah, we want that, but we want the story, if it seems crazy and not easily verifiable, to eventually have verifiable evidence. It can't just be well, I want them to go out on a wing and a prayer, but to just know in their heart of hearts that this is true. Like, there has to be, and that's why people said, what if your kids become Christians? I said, they're completely free. I've told them that. They're like,
yeah,
you're free to be a
right,
Christian, but we're going to have some serious conversations. How did you find out that it's true? Because I can show
yeah,
you evidence that it's just mythology,
right,
extreme, I mean, books worth of evidence. How did you
yeah,
conclude that it's true when everything else points to it not being? And I think that's the thing, is you want them to pursue the truth, but the truth has to be in the context of, can the claims be substantiated? And for Christianity and Mormonism and Scientology, I think the answer is clearly absolutely not.
yeah. I mean, so I'm a step back from there. And I might be more woo-woo in my current journey than you're comfortable being. Because I don't think that for me, I don't even think that I need to get to that place of like, prove to me that it's true. Because then you have the undefeatable argument from Christians, like there's no, you can't prove with your 5 senses the spiritual realm. And like, well, that would, if there is such a thing, that would be true. And so then you just have to like know in your heart. But before I even get to that whole like proof thing, for me, just like knowing the backstory is enough. Like, okay, you had that experience in that church. Now let's go actually attend a Mormon service. And before you go in, I want you to put in your mind that this is the true church, right? So just pretend for a second, you're going to play a character, you go in there, pretend like this is the real church, God's real church. This is the one truth. The same attitude that you walked into this Christian church with, I want you to walk into this Mormon church with, and look around and see the people weeping, see the people testifying to God's faithfulness, see all of this exact same stuff. This all feels just as divine, just as true, and their proof is the same as yours. Like literally, you talk to a Mormon missionary, they're like, just read the Bible and see if it resonates in your spirit. And they're right. Like if you read the Bible, their Bible, the Book of Mormon, if you read the Book of Mormon, believing that the Book of Mormon is holy and divine and inspired, it feels holy and divine and inspired. If you read the Bible, believing that it's inerrant and infallible, it reads inerrant and infallibly. So then what do you do with those? Like that would be my question for my kids, is like, we don't even need to get to the proof thing. Like this experience is too common among these irreconcilable belief systems that I don't know how you're going to just pick one based on feelings, because they're all picking theirs based on feelings.
Yes, exactly. Good point. So can I ask, as you are going back a little bit to your story, as you're thinking through some of those things, at what point were you free to verbalize them? And like, who were the safe people in your world? Like, did your wife object at all at first when you started talking about it? Or like, what was the first time you actually said what you were thinking out loud?
Yeah. Two great questions. Let's hit the wife thing and the when did I have questions thing. So I don't know, because again, it's like this piling up of things that eventually, like, you finally hit one and like all the rest of them click into place. Like these were all unknowns, and then you get to one known and the rest of them all like, oh, these are all knowns. There's a reason these never got an answer, because there is an answer and it wasn't the one that I was given. And so like that, so then when did you actually start having questions? Well, I started piling these things up a long time ago. One of the points in my history that I can look back on is in 2010, as a full-time minister, children's pastor, worship pastor, consultant for the mega churches around, I opened up this blog. I got this domain name, Finding God Despite Religion, which just really resonated with me at the time, because I was like, maybe all of this stuff is right. Maybe I'm in the one good, true church in all of the, like, I'm in the one good church in the one good denomination in the one good religion in the world, and we're out to save everybody else. But this one little thing seems a little bit weird. And then it was like, well, these 5 things, these dozen things, whatever. And so I would just kind of like put those in as these like little mini blog posts, like this thing seems weird, right? And like hoping that these things will get answers, right? Like, okay, someone's gonna come along and be like, oh, you idiot, that's obviously this. Oh, okay, cool, I can get rid of that one. So it wasn't even like objections or arguments against Christianity. It was just like, I wish someone would answer this thing for me, because it seems weird. So the fact that I opened up that domain in that year tells me there had been some things piling up to that point, because that was a dangerous move. And my dad, my pastor, tried to get me to shut it down, and shamed me and all that stuff. And, back to that, like, who do you think you are? You're so prideful, kind of a thing. Like you think you're smart enough to like have questions that no one's ever thought of before? Yeah, you're a genius, Jamin. Yeah, go for it. Like, ask your questions and find out the truth that no one else has been able to figure out. Like, so anyway, there was that whole thing. So I opened up that blog at that point.
I guess that's so demeaning. Wow.
Yeah.
It's humiliating to treat someone else like that. I mean, and also like, you could be asking, legitimate questions where you're just trying to be truly honest with this. And, you're not being snarky about it. You just truly are saying there's some issues. But I think what they're not realizing is, by shutting you down, they're not really taking your questions away. It's kind of like people used to always preach, you can't just suppress your anger and your negative emotions. You're not fixing it. You're burying it to come back and get you later. It's going to come back to life, and maybe twice as hard. But, when you bury these questions and tell people, you're just being rebellious or arrogant in asking this way, you might actually be in that, like, the original questions are part of the deconstruction. But the fact that Christians aren't letting you ask honest questions becomes almost like a secondary track.
Yeah. To give them their due, if they're right, they were doing the right thing. Like, if I see one of my kids like playing with a gun and pointing it around, being irresponsible with it, it's my duty to tackle them and to push it away from them and say, hey, you don't understand what you're messing with here. This is going to kill you. Except it's way worse in Christianity, because this is going to kill you for all eternity. So yeah, whatever disrespect there is in there, or I think that was Penn Jillette's argument about hell. Like, if you really believe this, unfortunately, like, this is your duty. You do need to be that condescending, whatever it takes to get that guy to shut down finding God despite religion. It's worth it for his soul, for his kid's soul, for anyone he might encounter who might take them down the wrong path. So I try to find some empathy for that. But yeah, the end result is exactly what you're talking about. Like,
but even more generic, like just any conversation where you don't feel like you can be honest with yourself, like, hey, Dad, I'm struggling with my thought life. Oh, what are you, a little pervert? Like, all of a sudden you can't talk about your sexuality. Like, anything where you feel like I can't be safe to open up is just, even if they're technically right and technically trying to protect you, it's like, if you can't be yourself and be honest, then it's eventually going to cause a big issue.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's I think why the anti-intellectualism is rampant in the Christianity that I've seen, is because you can't. There's an unfortunate number of answers to the questions that we have about God. Certainly not all the answers, but there's a lot of things that there's answers for out there that the world just really makes sense. And all these things that have been piling up, they're like, oh, I guess I'm just going to leave that as an unanswered. Or, in Christianity, we say, well, I'll ask God that when I get to heaven. Like, as it turns out, for a lot of that stuff, you don't have to wait until you get to heaven. Like, it's sad, but there's answers for a lot of that stuff. And you just can't afford that in a closed belief system like that. So
yeah. So when did your wife come into the equation in terms of your ability to talk to her?
Yeah, well, I've always been in our circle. I've always been the rebel. I mean, extremely fundamentalist, evangelical, white male rebel. So, like, the least rebel you could think of. But in our world, I was crazy. And so I was always kind of like the outcast. Like, maybe one of these days Jamin will, like, come to his senses and really commit his life to God for real, and really make the changes for the world that God wants him to make, that he was destined to make.
Well, can I ask that before you answer the question? What was your wife's perception of you more in line with, like, I like that he's a bit of a rebel, or more like, gosh, I hope he never takes this too far?
I don't know. I mean, she's like the nicest person you would ever meet. She's an eternal optimist. She just hopes that everything will work out, and thinks that maybe it will if you hope hard enough. And so she's just really, really sweet and really, really kind, and yeah, really, really, really hopeful. But I mean, we liked each other a lot, and so I think she had more empathy for my situation, because she heard more of the behind the scenes of, like, why I was coming to these conclusions. Maybe this is like just a common teenage feeling or whatever, like not being seen, but it felt like the authorities in my life were not interested in how I came to any of my conclusions. They were just interested in making sure that I didn't continue down those paths. Like, that you don't think those things, you don't need to worry about that. And so I think she got, like, a little bit more inside track, saw things from my perspective a little bit more. So she hoped that relationally it would work out, but I think she thought I was cute and smart, and she had a lot more inside information about how I was coming to my conclusions. So she was, I think, hopeful that eventually all of our paths would converge, and that eventually we would all see things the other person's way. So yeah, she was definitely, like, on my side, but hoping that my side was going to merge with their side eventually. So we never, like, really fought about any of this stuff. And she's one of these people too that I really envy, that I watch them in their deconstruction. And there's, like, some people, they're like, oh yeah, by the time I was 8, like, I knew this was all bullshit. And, like, how at 8? Like, how you're not smart enough at 8 to know that? Like, how did you? And then you just don't have to go through all of this. Like, you just avoid all of this deconstruction and all of this pain and all this because at 8 you were smarter than I am at 43. Like, screw you. That's not fair. You're not supposed to get away with that. I've got to go through all this stuff. So I feel like some people just give it up easier than other people. And so for her, I feel like once she got to a point where she's like, oh, well, this thing isn't right and this thing isn't right, I guess I don't need this thing anymore. And then it just like poof, it's gone. I mean, that's me watching, because I'm like deeply tormenting over every little thing. I write a 450-page book on all the little minutia. Like, I can't let it go, you know. And so I'm like trying to pick it apart. Like, but what if I'm wrong? But what if I'm wrong? And so I've got to pick all this stuff apart. And she's like, yeah, it doesn't seem like it's probably real. I'm like, man, I really envy that. So we haven't really had any conflict on it, even though our journeys through it have been very emotionally different.
So she is deconverted as well?
I'd have to let her speak for herself on the topic, but we don't currently attend church, and of the two of us, I'm the one that deeply wants to find a reason to go back, and she seems pretty cool with not at the moment. So, but I mean, we're by the time this publishes, we might feel very differently about it. But currently, like watching her in her process, yeah, she seems very content with not having most of the affects of the religion that we had before.
Let me put it this way. What is the percentage chance that you, in your words, that Yahweh is real?
Which Yahweh? I mean, this is the problem.
The Old Testament Protestant canon.
Man, in the like from the perspective of the church that I came from, it's a 0% chance. I mean, nothing is a 0% chance, but effectively a 0% chance. But their view of Yahweh is not the same as it was 200 years ago, or 200 years before that, or 200 years before that, or 200. So I don't know. This is the problem with like the labels. Like, do you believe in God, or are you a Christian, or like these are all nonsensical questions. Which one? Who are you talking about? Which Jesus? You guys have believed in like 100 different Jesuses, and you've changed his teaching. I don't even mean, I'm not even getting into the textual changes. I just mean like who you believe this guy is. What would Jesus do? Like, no one has agreed with anybody throughout history on this question. So we currently have a legend that says something like, I mean, we have this new, currently, if you're watching this close to the time that this gets released, there's this like campaign of like, he gets us, or whatever. It's like the Hobby Lobby people or whatever. And so like apparently Jesus is like this like just super against racism. He just really hates racism and just wants everybody to get along, and wishes that everybody would love each other. In spite of the fact that he says, you know, unless you hate your brother and sister and mother and father, then you can't really follow me. He says, I haven't come to bring peace, but to bring division. Like, he's whatever you want him to be. And
he calls a Samaritan woman a dog.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to list the verses here, it's going to be a very long podcast. But yeah, it's he is. You can pick out whatever you want him to be, and he is that thing. And I think that's a credit to Christianity, because Christianity is not going away anytime soon. And I at least want Christianity to be open to going, oh, I think we got this thing wrong, and we need to change our focus here. If you're going to be a Christianity that is open to change, and open to improvement, and open to more acceptance of more acceptance of people and more love of them, just for their existence, for their humanity, then I'm on board. Like, great, do Christianity, do Mormonism, do Scientology, do Santa Claus, like whatever gets you to that place. Then great, I'm all for it. But then you're gonna ask me, like, do you believe in Jesus? Like, you're gonna have to do a lot more defining before I can even get close to answering that question. Yeah, I do. I like, in my own head, like if I was just washing the dishes and you just like sneaked up on me and you're like, do you believe in Jesus? Well, yeah, of course I believe in Jesus. I think he's great. So my answer is yes, absolutely. But I would disagree with almost all the other people who say that they believe in Jesus. And that puts me in good company, because they would all disagree with all the other people throughout history who have said that they believe in Jesus. So yeah, we all answer yes, and none of us agree with each other.
It's interesting too that this really began at the very beginning. There were we know of at least 60 other gospels, and there's good reason to believe that there were originally hundreds of them that got discarded or destroyed on purpose. But even past the different gospels that were there, we know of many different early versions of Christianity. And yes, there was eventually one that kind of won the day that got sucked into the the Roman Catholic hierarchy and power there. But there were many versions of this, and so this idea of it's evolving based on culture, it's evolving based on politics, it's evolving based on just how we interpret. Was Yahweh
Yeah.
a good God or a bad God? Was he a psychopath,
Yeah.
or do we want him to be Jesus's father? All this stuff, and then of course, when you get into the church's established theology of the Trinity and all the different ways it evolved, you're like, this thing does keep on changing based on the whims of the culture. And I think you could argue that based on things like our current, even in our country alone, the current politics of the last 8 years have changed Christianity quite a bit yet again. And it does keep on changing. But I think that the thing that I like to get back to is not, are there some good verses where you can get back to
Yeah.
a gentle Jesus, meek and mild, that kind of helps you, but the question of, are any of the claims of Christianity actually true in terms of did Jesus do the things he said he did? Was there a resurrection? All those things, and honestly, at the end of the day, is any of it relevant to us? Even if you could find, well, we think he didn't probably resurrect, but he probably did this, and maybe he did that if he was real. It's like, okay, well, is any of it relevant? And can you not get the same good messages from any other number of philosophies, especially since we know they copied from other philosophies? Is Jesus necessary? And that's why I want to bring it back to a question to what you just said a few minutes ago. Is you said something like, "I'm looking for reasons to get back to church," if I heard you correctly. What do you mean by that, and where are you going with that?
Oh man. All right. So I'm just assuming that no evangelicals have made it this deep into this in the podcast. So I'm gonna go ahead and say some stuff that I normally wouldn't say to their face, because generally when you bring out the word Santa Claus, they feel offended. And I don't mean to compare the with this fictional Saint Nick character with the uh, Son of God, the manifestation of the Trinitarian Godhead. But um, like I remember believing in Santa, and that was fun. That was cool. That was a candy coated version of the world that is in a lot of ways enviable. I currently live with a more sober reality that, dang, if I don't make money and buy the presents and put them under the tree, no one else is going to do it. That's up to me. And that sucks. I really want there to be a guy that takes care of that for me and knows who's naughty and who's nice and who's going to make it all right. And he's coming to town tonight, and we better get in bed so that he can come do his magic, and I don't have to worry about any of that crap. That'd be wonderful. I would love to go back to that, even though I don't think that I can. And in a lot of ways, like that's a really messed up worldview. This old man is watching you while you sleep. Okay, but like that, I did that wasn't my reality. Like as a kid believing in Santa, that wasn't like, oh, there's this really creepy guy. It's not until you get later on in life that you have to sober up to those things. So that worldview, like I in a lot of ways, I can say I would love to go back to that. And I think that in this book and in life in general, I'm more interested right now in building bridges with people, and so I don't feel like I'm opposed to evangelicals. Again, like I would want to be one of you. And I don't have anything better to convert you to. I don't have a better religion than your religion. So I want to be open to them holding their worldview and not wanting to change them. So in that sense, yeah, I'd love to get back to it. I'd love to become an evangelical again. There's all kinds of messy ways in which that's like, no, I definitely shouldn't, because that's a much more evil way to live than the godless love that I'm currently living in. But
So could it
yeah,
be fair to say a parallel would be in the Matrix when Cypher asks to
yeah,
get plugged back into the Matrix? He
yeah,
just would rather just not know. Is that what you mean? More
yeah,
like you wish you could, if you could just go back to simple innocence, but you know that you can't, and you know you actually don't want to. Is that what
yeah,
you mean?
yeah. I've edited out several references to the Matrix in my book just because I feel like it's overplayed. But yeah, like it's scarily relevant, unfortunately. And also like to give the evangelicals their due, like that sounds even now to me like a really arrogant statement. Like, oh, all you guys don't understand the way the world really works, but I'm smart enough. I figured it out. Like, I know how the world really works. So I try to avoid that analogy just because I don't want to make evangelicals feel like I feel like I'm the smart one and you're the dumb one, because I don't feel that way. In fact, I admit in my book multiple times there are lots of Christian apologists that would definitely beat me in a debate. I can't prove most of my points, and I don't have the large enough vocabulary to express a lot of the things that I've discovered, and my memory isn't good enough to remember them in a debate. And I love them. Like, these are people that I would definitely fanboy over if I saw them. Like, Ken Ham was an important person in my life. He's the young Earth guy. And so if I met him, like, I'm not going to convert him, and I'm not going to convince him. And if we get in a fight if we get in a debate about it, he's going to win. I just really want to give him a hug. Like, you are an important guy. I have lots of nostalgic memories of you. And you personally didn't do anything to me. You were expressing your beliefs and your thoughts, and you're allowed to. And so thanks for doing that. Like, we need more honest people out here. So thank you for what you do. Like, that would probably be my honest interaction with him. And I couldn't disagree with the guy more. Some of the things he says just are absolutely asinine in my opinion. But I don't have. Yeah.
Can I ask? So I don't want to, of course, ever turn an interview into a debate, but these are some people who arguably are doing psychological abuse to people, including children. I mean, so the ability to think graciously and treat someone graciously who's abusing children psychologically. Like, we at some point we got to call it what it is, and that's what's. I think I'm struggling to see the reason that you seem compelled to be more gracious, and I'm very open, and people that watch my show know I try not to be obnoxious in my conversation, but in my mind I'm very militant, and I'm very, very, I'm looking at it from the perspective of this is horrific what it's done to our world and what it's doing to people still. At what point would you be willing to be more vocal and say, guys, this is sick, like, this is really messed up, you got to stop. I know you mean well, but so do white supremacists. Like, there's a lot of people that we as atheists would agree with Christians. Like, white supremacy, I mean, some Christians would disagree with this, but hopefully a lot of Christians would say, yeah, white supremacy should stop, it should end, it's not appropriate, it's toxic. And it's a horrible thing if it's in any way expanding or continuing in our world. So we would say, I can't just, even if I appreciate the fact that you all have some interesting cultural background that maybe is not necessarily tied to the worst parts of this, and maybe you've said some nice things and you've fed some homeless people, like, there's some things you could say nice about those people, I'm sure, if you look hard enough. But still, they're white supremacists. These are people who are telling children, you're going to burn in hell unless you believe just like us. And at some point you have to call it, they're psychologically torturing children.
I don't disagree with that at all. And for what I could do, like, I would vote for them to lose their non-profit tax exemption. I think he should have shut the whole place down, his whole museum. Not until I go there, because I have got to see this place, and I haven't been there yet. But as soon as I go, he's got to shut the place down, because it's absolutely causing all kinds of unnecessary damage in people's lives. But on a one-on-one level, like that's all my political belief and my philosophical and theological belief. But as a person, like, I think if he just chilled out more, he would do less damage. And so part of my current perspective is, like, I don't have anything to convert him into. It's not like, here's this other religion that I have that's nicer, you should just convert your life to whatever, Jaminism. So I don't really have anything to offer him. I just think that he would be a lot less damaging if he chilled out. I don't think that's stated as strongly as I want to state it. Let me try that again. And you don't have to edit this out, but that's definitely true. There is a version of Jamin that thinks that. Also, like, I wouldn't leave my kids alone with him, not because I think he would be impure to their bodies, but he would definitely be impure to their minds. And I don't want them walking out with his ideas, which is part of the reason that my kids don't go to church anymore, is because they were going to youth group even after we stopped going to church, because it's nice kids and nice people and whatever. But then they would come home with these lessons of like, oh well, here's what we learned in church today. Is that true? Like, oh dang, no, baby, you don't have to live with that in your head. Like, that's not true at all. No, they're just absolutely wrong. And then we would talk about why, and so like I don't want that. I don't want their ideas in my kids' heads. I think that's dangerous. But also, I don't know what I'm going to do about it, other than politically try to get them in a position where they're able to do that less effectively and to fewer people, which is the same thing that I would say about anyone that I would visit in prison. Like, I can love you as a person, but you got to stay in this cage, unfortunately, if you're going to keep killing people when you get out. So what I think about their organization and their actions is separate from what I think of them as people, especially since they've played important roles in my personal life. Like, anyone who's been abused, like, you still have like, yeah, my dad hit me, but not me personally, but my dad hit me, but we had our good moments too. Well, I don't need to take those good moments from you. Like, you can still have those, but also you understand he's got to be locked up. Like, he's a danger to society. So those two very different things coexist in my head right now.
Just to sidetrack, since you mentioned your kids, how did they respond when you became more vocal or explaining to them, what your switch was, and at what age would they have been approximately on average, and just what were those conversations like?
Yeah, my oldest right now are just getting into their teen years. So they were like in the 10-ish range, like preteen, when things really started falling apart. And I don't know right now, like, as far as like what do I say to them? I just try to be honest with them. And the most honest thing is I don't know. Like, I can't get myself to, if it would be the same as if they asked, like, is Scientology real? Like, I guess there's a non-zero chance that Scientology is real. But let's take a look. Let's see what the history of Scientology is. Here's what they all believe, and if you go in the door, here's what they're going to tell you. And baby, you got to make up your mind for yourself at some point. But I do want you to have the full story. And so it's kind of like that with Christianity. Like, let me just give you a little bit of the backstory, and then I don't really need to force you into any particular answer, because I don't have any particular answer myself. I just really want you to be honest. I want you to grow up being able to ask whatever questions you've really got and be honest about the answers that you find. So I don't know what religion that's called, but it's called honesty in my world.
Yeah, rationality and skepticism, maybe. Do any of them profess faith in Christ?
No, man,
Nice.
that's a dark answer.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. That's not dark.
So
that's light. That's light. That's not dark at all.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm recently deconverted, and there is nothing worse in the world than having to give that answer. But yeah, in fact, it's weird for me as a parent, because I grew up 40 years in, pastor's kid. Like, I knew all the Bible stories. I had all the verses. By the time I was like 5, 6, 7, I had dozens of verses memorized. And I knew all of the Bible stories. So occasionally something will come up, like a reference to Job or something, like, who's Job? Like, what are you talking about? You're 13. How do you not know who Job is? That's crazy. So it's hard for me to like restrain myself of like, you don't know anything at all, because I don't want their experience of the religion or of me to be that. But it's weird being a pastor's kid, growing up with kids that aren't pastor's kids. It's really weird, the things that they don't know about the religion. Like, wow, so I don't know how to present to you Job then, because all I know is how to, I presented Job to hundreds of kids, maybe thousands of kids over the years. Like, I know how to teach you about Job, and I don't dare teach you about Job, because I know that my version is definitely wrong. So now I've got to like go reread Job, and that's troubling. You go back into any of these stories, like even the Gospels, even the nice stories, you go back and read them with a little bit more open mind. It's like, well, there's all kinds of things in this that I taught this story hundreds of times, and I can't bring myself to tell someone that this is truth. Like, this is really, there's a lot of messed up stuff in here. So it's a weird experience having kids in it that I don't think I would have if I was just deconstructing on my own. Because now I've got to go back and reread the stories and like, okay, how do I present this from? I don't want to be like anti. I don't want to be like, this is all stupid and this is all crazy and everyone who thinks this is stupid. But then I also can't teach them the version that I taught for decades. So it's weird. I don't know.
Would you say that you have gone through yet of an angry atheist phase where you're just like, I cannot believe I've wasted so much time. I can't believe you all didn't tell me. I can't believe. And I don't mean to say that, like, people can still say that in a very polite sense
Mm-hmm.
of like, I'm surprised I didn't hear this before. But I mean it
Mm-hmm.
more like an angry, like, I can't believe it. Like, where was this information? You all must have known it. This is bullshit. You didn't tell me.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I think, uh, as an analogy, when a Nazi guard realizes that their worldview is wrong, it's hard to get mad at the higher ups because you realize you were the higher ups. So for people like me, I know in from my experience during my 20, 30 years of actually being a teacher in this stuff, I don't think there was a moment in there that I was insincere or that I was lying on purpose. Um, and so I've got to come to grips with that. Like I did a lot of damage. I did a lot of damage to a lot of people in ways that I'll never even know. I might have been influential in multiple suicides throughout the years. Because I told them essentially that they should, um, through the theology, through what I told them God thought of them. So that sucks. So then it's hard for me to take a look at my own authorities and go, but you guys were lying to me. Like, crap. I don't think that you were. Some of you were, and that's troubling because now when I talk to some theologians, and they're like, yeah, 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 but shut up about this stuff because like people aren't smart enough to know. Like, whoa, hang on, like you're one of the bad ones. That's like that's a whole other level. It's always easier to make the other guys the bad guys. My people who were like me, were not the bad guys. We were the good guys, and we were all doing our best. And I think that's where I usually have to settle just because of my circumstances is I think the people who were above me, my parents, the denomination, the churches that I was involved in, I think they were all doing their best. And this is the way that this this universe goes. If you give an amoeba the mandate to replicate, I think you end up eventually down the line with a Jamin Coller who's responsible for not responsible, but influential in other people's suicides and is telling people about Jesus. I think that's where we get. And so I don't know that there's another universe that I could have lived in where I wouldn't have been lied to or whatever. This is the way that it goes. And I'm fortunate to have one of these broken brains that persistently asks questions because there's a lot of other people that just don't. Like they're good with the answer they got and they're still doing their Santa thing. And yeah, I happen to be given this particular perspective in the world. So I don't feel like I'm in control of a lot of this stuff. I don't feel like my authorities are in control of a lot of this stuff. Like, oh, this is what you get. Like this is the world that you come up with. And given the broader perspective of like, I'm so unfortunate that I was born in 2023 as a middle class white American male. Like you don't there's not a lot you get to complain about in that situation. It's frustrating that I didn't know sooner. Again, I'm jealous of those 8-year-olds who are like, oh yeah, I'm not believing in this. This is crazy. Like, oh man, that's really cool to be you. But I don't know, 43 is better than 44. So I'm gonna take it from here.
Yeah, I agreed. I was just about the same exact time frame, almost exactly. I think I'm about 3 or 4 years older, but yeah, mine was right around 43 as well. I can
Yeah.
definitely relate to some of that. I did the same thing. I feel like a lot of my needing to do what I do is to try my best to undo some of the damage. And I know it's not a one for one because I'm not undoing it for the specific people, but I
Mm.
was involved in the same thing, very involved in church and youth group and a lot of street preaching in
Yeah.
downtown Philadelphia and in other neighborhoods, just doing a lot of stuff. Soup kitchens where the homeless people can't get their food until they listen to somebody preach, and I was the one preaching
Yeah.
for many years. And you do feel like, wow, like I wish I could go back one to one to the people I spoke with,
Yeah.
especially the teenagers, and say, I'm sorry. And I've been able to fortunately track down some of them and do that. But you just feel like, wow, like I feel that like there's a, it evolves a little bit into a question of, all right, you can't undo the damage you've done, but in the big picture, what can you do to make this bigger? And I feel like to me the question has evolved to from can you apologize to the specific people you've hurt through this worldview to can you leave the planet simply better than you found it now? And to say like I say this tongue in cheek, but also somewhat seriously, if I put 1,000 people into the kingdom, I'm going to try to take 100,000 back out. And it's like that's like this is a big deal for me. Call it
Yeah,
reparations, whatever, but like I don't
right.
want to be. I want to make sure that when you, if I know that there's no heaven or hell to balance my actions, but if there were a judgment, of like, all right, which weigh the way is good versus bad, to say, all right, well, he did an incredible amount of bad with them spreading mythology. He did an incredible amount of good undoing
Mhm.
it and helping people heal from it. And that it's not my only driver, but it's a piece of it.
Yeah. Man, there's so many interesting things in there. I think this is yeah. So a couple of things. I hope to get back to what you were just saying about the good versus bad. Um, I because I don't have another religion that I'm trying to convert anybody to. I feel like the religion that I want to convert everyone to is the religion of love. Like whatever form that takes. If it takes Santa, believe in Santa. Believe harder in Santa. Like where can I donate to your Santa Foundation so that you can do more Santa if that's what you need in order to be more loving to more people. And again, that's not to say that we don't, punish bad actions or that some people need to be held away from society. But like in general, like how do we get rid of the unnecessary unlove that there is? And so it includes Christians. Like I want you to be more Christian if that's working for you. The Mormons that come to my house, I'll talk with them, and I in no way want to deconvert them from their Mormonism. Like if that's working for you and it's causing you to be more loving, I don't know that it's not. And I don't know that you'd be more loving if you came to where I am, because I know a lot of people who've gone through my process and haven't made it out alive because these things deconstructed too terribly. And I wasn't very far away from that myself. So I don't know that you should come down this path. This might be a horrible path for you. I want you to be on any path out there that is going to cause you to be more moral, more ethical, more loving, more compassionate. And so that's my new religion is like my religion is whatever religion you're in. I just want the nice version of it. And so, but I do find it interesting that like in the whole question of like whether or not there's a God that we talked a little bit about before the interview. Um, I do find it interesting that throughout our species history, we keep reinventing this guy, whether it is Mithras or Romulus or Jesus or whoever it is. Like this is a thing that we seem to want or arguably need is we really want Papa to like we want to know that somebody else other than me is in charge, because I'm smart enough to know that I'm not smart enough to know how things are supposed to go. So I want the reassurance. There's someone up there, please, God, tell me there's somebody who's smarter than me who's in charge of all this. And we want to have aligned ourselves with that thing, whatever that is, whatever is bigger than me and smarter than me. And so this is where I start getting maybe a little bit more woo woo, and like this is where I'm almost a theist at this point, because like I think that's important, and our species history seems to support the idea that this trait that we have evolved is an important one of this God character. And perhaps we can separate ourselves from the letters God, but the concept seems important to us. And I find it interesting, and tell me if I'm projecting on you. I probably am. But like the whole thing of like wanting to earn your salvation, really. I mean, like I want my existence here to have done more good than bad. Why should that be? Like that doesn't make much sense. I mean, in the context of like a communal living, and your ability to obviously we would have, if evolution and all that crap is true, then we would have evolved to be these communal people, and so we want to be in a tribe that thinks that we are worth keeping around. So like there's some explanation there, but like it's just so deep in us. Like even as the harmonic atheist, arguably you still want to earn your salvation. And so I feel like you've got to, as Jordan Peterson would put it, you got to give the devil his due. Like there is something about this religion that is doing something. Lots of bad things are definitely, undoubtedly, but there are some elements that we can't get away from, I think. And I need someone else. I know that I'm not smart enough to be in charge. That's one of them. I really want to have mattered. That's another one. And these are all, I feel like God, the God character, is a great heuristic for so many of these things that are so deep in us, evolutionarily created urges that are in us. That like God seems like a fine heuristic from my perspective. Like if that works for you, yeah, God's a great shorthand for all of those things.
Yeah, I definitely have a different perspective on all that. I would say
Tell me.
well, I would say in part, I think some of the reasons that we choose to do so much good and well, we're Christians, of course, is the whole carrot and the stick. I want to
Right.
avoid hell. I want to get into heaven, and I want God to be pleased with me along the way, and certainly, in the afterlife with rewards. I think some of that's psychologically deeply connected to our parents, that we want our parents to say, good job, and it just kind of transfers up to the Heavenly Father concept.
Yeah.
But we're still all in many ways children. We're still, we grow up and we get jobs and we work hard and we have our own kids, but in some ways we're all still children inside, and we're still trying to get our parents to be happy with us. And I think some of that drives us. But I think there's something amazing to be said that yes, that you don't have to choose a life where you sacrifice and give. You could deconvert and just be like, I'm just gonna watch football and drink beer, and to hell with everybody else. I don't care how you live your life. I don't have to create a channel to encourage people to heal and tell their stories. But whatever you'd say from my vantage point is good. Like, I think good things I'm doing to outweigh the bad.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't think I'm going to be ultimately judged for it. And unfortunately, even the worst, criminals of human history are not ultimately going to face a final judgment, which kind of sucks. But at the end of the day, I know that for me, a big driver, and perhaps at this point, almost the biggest driver for me, is simply my children. Like I know what I would have needed. I know what I would have needed as a child to thrive, and I had some of it. I didn't have all of it. I had a dad that, told me he wished you'd never been born. Things like that. Some pretty horrific things over the years.
I'm sorry, your dad said that to you?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different things. Very angry man, very, screaming at me, screaming at my mom. I'd sit at the top of the stairs and listen to him just berate her verbally as a child. Wishing I could interject, but as a 5-year-old, just listening to him scream his head off and threaten her and so forth. But there was still, my mom was a lovely woman. She was a lovely Christian. She's still alive. But there was a mixture of some good and bad things. But I can look at that and say, I know what I would have needed to thrive. And you say, well, who cares if someone thrives? It's like, ultimately, if you're a nihilist, it doesn't matter if you thrive or you end up, boozing your life away. Like, who cares? And I agree. In some ways, it is a nihilist. It doesn't ultimately matter. And in some ways, this is just all absurdity. But you can't live in that frame of reference. And I don't feel like I need God as my frame of reference to say, I can see what puts a smile on my little girl's face. I can see what makes my little boy just so glad that he can run into my room, to my office, and say, Daddy, can I show you what I just made? I don't give him words of affirmation, and I don't kneel down and hug my little girl because I think I'm gonna somehow earn something in the afterlife, but I know that they need it. And being where I've been from and being where I see them, there's just this drive to say, I want to give them something better. And you do see it even in the baser animals. You see animals that are willing to do anything to feed their children, even if even risk their own lives. I think it's, apart from, I don't know too much about Jordan Peterson. I honestly don't listen to him, but I've heard enough to know a little bit about what he stands for. But I've also heard enough to know I don't need to hear anymore. But I do think that some of this stuff is just people confusing the fact that we can just choose to do good. It's kind of like that to pick the reverse of it all. That thing I've heard a lot of people say this, so I don't know who to say I'm quoting, but that sense of like, what's to keep you from just murdering and raping if you're not a Christian? And it's like, well, I do murder and rape as much as I want to, and that number is zero.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't want to. Like, well, why don't you want to? I don't know, but I just don't want to. I want to love other people.
Yeah.
And I think we're attributing it to some kind of eternality. And I think, maybe as a side motivation is just, I want people to look at my life and say, his life did count for something. But yeah, in the
Yeah.
end, that doesn't matter. 3 or 4 generations from now, no one's going to know my name or what I did,
Yeah.
and it won't matter. But it's like that. You probably heard that starfish illustration in the church, like, oh, there's a
Yes.
million starfish drying up. They're all going to die because of the
Right.
sun is going to dry them out. And the guy's throwing like one or two in at a time. It's like, yeah, but to that one or two, it mattered. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's my motivation. But I don't ever feel like I've got this sense that I'm going to get rewarded in any sense for what I'm doing.
Right.
And honestly, too, there's something in my psyche that just makes me thrive when I think, how can you help? How can you help the
Yeah.
wounded? Um,
Right.
but when you look at this, though, to turn it back to you, do you feel like there's anything in you that's motivating you towards some kind of reward in a transcendent sense?
Oh. Um. I there's so many words that need so many definitions in there that I can answer fully honestly yes and no to that. So let me just riff on it for a little bit. The What we were talking about before the interview, the thing with love. I don't know what love is. I'm pretty sure that before the foundations of the universe, there was not one woman that God picked out for me who I was supposed to fall in love with, and that is God's one plan, and anything else is a failure to be a part of His will. Thus, that's not real, uh, as far as I'm concerned. Also, the Cinderella thing probably isn't, like, to take it down a level. That's probably not real either. Like, there's no one that you could marry that you just like, oh well, the world is bliss now and we all live happily ever after. Like, you're gonna fight pretty hard with any roommate that you've got. So that thing isn't real, and we keep going down levels of, like, what is love, like what is true love. Well, true love isn't real. Like, okay, so then at the very bottom of it, like, what do I actually know? Not much. And unfortunately, there's recently been a lot of, like, in the last 100 years, we've learned a lot about the chemicals that make up this experience that we have. And the experience of it is definitely all of those things, like all the way up to, like, the God's will thing. Like, it feels like that thing. The experience is, this is the one person in all of the universe throughout all of time who, this is the only person I am supposed to be with. That's totally real, that experience. But the experience is way different than the definition of it, and the definition has something to do with, like, oxytocin and a bunch of other things that I can't pronounce, and a bunch of stuff that we probably haven't even learned about yet. And it's like just this chemical, physical interaction that I don't have control of that makes me feel like this thing, like it's a mushroom trip. Like, well, it's obviously the mushrooms, but the experience is way different than the definition of the thing that grows out of the ground. So, uh, this as an analogy, like this love thing, like you're saying, the definition of it, I can't live in the definition of it. I can't tell my kids, oh, I don't love you because love isn't real. Like, that's going to wreck a person. So you don't live that way. You live as if somewhere on this other hierarchy, maybe not the whole God's will thing, because maybe that seems too ridiculous to you, but somewhere, and maybe not the Cinderella thing, because that's got problems, but you're going to pick some level of love that you live as if that thing is true. And that's a great place for you to be, because you don't want to be down here thinking that, oh, we figured love out and we know what it is, and it's just these two chemicals, and that's all love is, and love isn't real, because that's gonna leave you with nihilism, like the darker version of nihilism. So then, like, I'm sorry, that was my analogy, and I forgot what it was an analogy for. Oh, about whether or not I feel purpose, like, in things, and what do I get purpose in. So I don't trust that I'm smart enough to know all the subconscious stuff that's going on, or why I'm doing what I'm doing. I do know that this life of compassion and awe and what I could consider divinity, like these holiness, these are all things that describe the experience way better than most of the atheist definitions of what's going on. So I agree with both of them. Like that, yeah, like the God character, probably probably not real. That's a hard sentence to say, and it's a sentence I don't want any Christian to hear because they're not going to take it the way that I mean it. But yeah, it's definitely not there. But also, like, the experience of life is God's real. God's 100% real. And so, where do I find purpose in? It's the compassion thing. It's the love thing, and that's where like verses come up in my head because I've got a zillion of them stuck up there, like God is love and all this other stuff, and that comes from the Christian tradition. If I wasn't a Christian, if I had been raised a whatever the Buddhist version of a pastor's kid is, like, then I would have had all of those things, and those would be the things that motivate me, and those would be the quotes that would come up. So for me, it's a Christian background, so I sound like a really Christian atheist, and I'm fine with that definition. I get purpose from the parts of my Christianity that don't conflict with my atheism.
Gotcha. Well, I feel like I want to dive into that at some point more, but I definitely want to ask you a few final questions here as we head towards a wrap up, just because I do want to make sure we get a chance to touch on a few final topics. I did want to ask, I want to get to your book in a second, but one final question more about your deconversion. The afterlife. Do you think at this point, based on the evidence, not what do you want, but what do you think? Do you think there is an afterlife? And then the corollary: do you wish there had been one? If the answer is no.
Okay. Do I think there is one? No, I don't need one. I live a better life if I live as if there is no afterlife, hell and heaven included. And I've got a good couple chunks of the book dedicated to this. But in my experience, the belief in hell leads us to some really, really awful actions. And so maybe hell's totally real. It's but I'm going to be a better Christian. I'm going to live a better life. I'm going to be a more moral person if I live as if hell is not real. So personally, for a lot of reasons that would take a long time to explain, I need to live as if hell is not real. And the same is true for heaven. Unfortunately, like, heaven seems like it'd be a really happy place, but it's got some really, really dire consequences. As just a real quick snippet of it, my dad's dad passed away recently, who was a pastor in the same denomination, a true believer. My dad's a pastor, true believer. I was not invited to the funeral because I'm not a part of the family anymore, but I did watch the live stream, and when my dad got up to start the service, his first sentence, this is his dad's funeral, his first sentence is, "Are we having fun or what?" That's what he said at the beginning, and I know him well enough to know that he really meant it. And that is fucking tragic. Like that, like there are so many things you're not dealing with. If you can get up at your dad's funeral, who you loved with all of your heart, they don't have any arguments. They agree on everything. This is one of the most important men in your life. And your first sentence to start off his service is, "Are we having fun or what?" Because he's
as
just
in,
so
like,
happy.
it's a celebration that he's graduated to heaven.
Oh yeah. Well, and I mean, that's just one. I've attended dozens, if not hundreds, of funerals, and they're all the same. Like, if it's a non-Christian, like, we're going to try to, like, not make too much of a point of the fact that this person is currently burning in hell forever, and there's nothing we can do about it at this point. So for the sake of the family, we're going to, like, tiptoe around that. But we're definitely at the end, before the end of this thing, we're definitely going to be like, who knows where this guy is, but you can be sure where you're going to go when you die. And so you can get to heaven if you pray this prayer, completely putting aside all the wishes of the person who's actually in the casket, right? Like, what they want doesn't matter anymore, because we've got more eternal matters at stake here. So you've got the non-Christian funeral, which is that, and then you've got the Christian funeral, which is this other thing, which is just, like, sick. As far as I can tell, and they're all happy with it. They don't need to change a thing. They're in their bliss world. But for me, watching it, like, man, that would, like, you don't ever get a chance to grieve this guy. There's no sadness. That's not allowed. Like, the only reason you would be sad at a Christian's funeral is if you were selfish enough to not be happy for them. They're infinitely more happy than you are right now, and you're sad about it. How dare you? And so, for that and a lot of other reasons I've listed in the book, like, I live a better life if I pretend like heaven isn't real. Also, I happen to think that hell and heaven aren't real. But regardless of whether they are, I'm a better Christian. I'm a more moral person if I live as if heaven and hell aren't real. So both practically and rationally, I'm going to go with no, heaven and hell aren't real. There's no afterlife. But if there is, that's great. That's wonderful. Maybe forever's a long time. And when you only get 3 lyrics, holy, 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 for all of eternity, it seems like by about the millionth year, that's going to get really tiring. But God's a big God, and he's got a plan for it all. I'm sure he's got it all scheduled out, and eternity is going to be great. I don't know. I'm open to it. But no, it's not real.
Yeah, I would land very much the same way. I think it was a great answer, and I've had people, to the one thing you said about it's eternity sounds like a long time. I've had people say that, and that's like the only objection that's maybe gotten close to like an actual answer. Like, you have no idea how bored you're going to get after a trillion, trillion, trillion years. But my answer to that is, in Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus and his men are trying to get back home, and they get caught on this island, and there's this goddess and these other amazing divine people, and Odysseus, he's sleeping with this goddess, and after in his mind 3 days, he's like, I know I've been here with you for 3 days, but I need to keep moving. I need to get back home. And she's
Yeah.
like, you haven't, and I'm probably botching the number of days, but like, you haven't been here for 3 days. You've been here for 7 years. And he's like, what? But that idea of like, you can
Yeah.
imagine that if God can create this whole
Yeah.
universe and he can create heaven,
Right.
he can make
Sure.
it so that you could feel like a trillion years is like
Yeah.
a blink of an eye. And even the
Right.
Bible says stuff like that. But you
Yeah.
get that sense that the idea of eternity is not actually, if the Yahweh character were real, and if he were theoretically good,
Mhm.
eternity not being boring would not be a problem for him.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
wanted to live
Yeah.
for the afterlife. I still do, and it still hurts me. I tell people tell me
Yeah.
I don't want to live. I do want to live forever, and to
Yeah.
this day I don't have nightmares per se about it, I don't think, but like achingly inside, that's
Yeah.
Christianity broke my heart. I wanted to and
Yeah.
still do want to live
Yeah.
forever, and I know I'm not going to, but
Yeah.
boy does it suck. And I think it would have been absolutely wonderful, and I hate that I lost it, but I have to be honest with the facts.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that goes back to I think this is where like the Santa analogy, as offensive as that is to Christians, it doesn't even scratch the surface of what deconstructionists are going through. Like it's so much bigger than that. Like it's Santa times, well, infinity, really, quite literally. Like you just what you promised me and what I've lost is devastating. There's not words for it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, before we get to your book, I did want to ask one final question about your journey. And when I say your book, I mean I want you to kind of plug it a little bit more. But your family's reaction, your broader
Yeah.
family's reaction. This sounds fairly extreme. I know you've explained some of it, but tell us how those are like early conversations happened and evolved. And it sounds like you're the victim of what I would call some pretty extreme shunning at this point.
Yeah.
Fill us in on what happened there and how have you dealt with all that?
Yeah. Well, I think that the denomination the church that I was a part of in that denomination was not unique. As I read other like cult survivor stories, not that I consider myself a cult survivor, maybe, but these other stories have this common theme in them, which is cutting people off. And in every case, in Scientology, in Westboro Baptist, in Mormonism, like almost never does the church say you're cut off, like you're not allowed to attend here anymore. The message is almost always some version of, oh well, you're an evil person now, and you're welcome to join us. We're all talking about you behind your back, and we all think that you're horrible, and you're not going to get any positions of authority. You're not getting any respect around here. And everybody is laughing about you and praying for you. Like we all just pity you constantly. But yeah, come fellowship with us, and maybe someday you'll get saved.
Passive
So
aggressive much?
right. So in that way, I don't know that uh, my church, my family, my pastor, these are all the same thing. I don't know that they ever, I know for sure that they, in their minds, they have never cut anyone off. Like they've been honest with people about what God's word says and about what God says, and those people have made a decision to walk away from God whenever they walked away from the church. So there's not like this in their minds. They're not shunning anyone. Like they're still open to me being a part of the family, except that I'm not part of the family. Like I've taken myself out of God's family, and so I'm not a part of their family. And so I think if I came back with the uh, an apology that they felt was appropriate and a worldview that they could accept, um, and if I begged in the right way, that they would be gracious enough to forgive me my sins and to accept me back into, and gladly, like again, like their son is currently going to hell, if hell exists, so uh, they would be happy to see that happen. But I don't think in their mind they're shunning me. And this is just again my attempt to be empathetic with their position. But yeah, absolutely. I'm not a part of the family. I'm kicked out. I'm out of the will, and I'm shunned. They want nothing to do with me, and they think that I'm dangerous, and they pity my kids. All of that because I don't believe in the right way currently. So I haven't had any contact with them. But even if like, yeah, there's a lot of messiness in there. But even in our last contact, their last contact with me was something like, "We'll respect your wishes to no longer have relationship with you." Like, and I've seen it happen enough, a good 20, 30 years of these types of cutting off to know that like there's no way you can go back to a person like that and be like, no, you're cutting me off. Like, no, you're cutting us off. So that whole conversation is pointless. And I do hope that someday we'll get to some kind of I'm allergic to the word reconciliation, but I love them and I want the best for them. And sadly, I think they would say the same exact sentence about me, and I think that's probably why we're not talking. So yeah.
And unfortunately, in those cases, it is very much an impasse. I mean, the glorious thing to me is that you and your wife are on the same page or close to it. That's golden.
Yeah.
That's golden. My story, if
Yeah.
you know it all, is very much the opposite. So I just want to say,
No.
like, wow, it's wonderful. That's if you can, build that up as strong as you can and cling to it like
Yeah.
your life depends on it, because that's amazing.
Yeah. I don't maybe I just haven't had very many trials in life. There's a Christian phrase if there ever was one. But like this, it seems significant that like if you were going to marry someone, if you're a Scientologist, you should probably marry a Scientologist. Like that's probably just good relationship advice because you need some kind of like common worldview. So if one of the two of you changes your worldview significantly or is unable to uh, maintain their grip on the former worldview, um, yeah, that it seems like that's going to create a lot of division, and it has for me. Obviously, me and my family, me and all of my friends from that time. I don't have really contact with any of them for all these same reasons. So that seems really reasonable. That if you are going, I've heard this from other people, I guess, who have gone through it, and them and their spouse have not been on the same page. Like if you're going to cling to anything, like let go of your grip on God and cling to each other, because there's that's going to fall apart. Everything's going to fall apart, and you gotta hold on to something if there's a possibility or any point in that. That I didn't mean
Mm,
that as advice, I guess, but I've heard that same story from many people. just like I don't know how a relationship survives something like that.
yeah, it is crazy, and for many people, it isn't. Mine certainly
Yeah.
it did not, and it's not going to. That's for sure, and it's
Is she
tragic.
still is she
Was
still a believer?
Oh yeah, hardcore fundamentalist,
Huh.
Christian nationalist, Calvinist, you name
Wow.
it.
Okay.
It's hardcore. We're taking over the country for Christ,
Yeah.
and every word of God is infallible. The earth is 6,000 years old. Blah blah blah. It goes on and on. And
Oh man.
no, I'm
Sorry.
I'm enemy number one in many ways, and it turned immediately into a touchless marriage, which is very sad too. I
Yeah.
mean, immediately. But I was going to go back to your parents' topic too. My mom is not as passive aggressive, I would say, in terms of what you versus what you faced. But the one thing that did come my way, which was interesting, was she didn't want to talk about it much. It was just like a too much to deal with. But we did have
Yeah.
one heart to heart about maybe a year after I deconverted. We were just sitting in the car together, just her and me, and she said, I'm just gonna be honest. I wish I'd never been born.
Mm.
And I knew immediately what she meant. She didn't even have to explain it. She meant I have birthed a son who is going to burn in hell. I would have rather never been born myself than know that one of my children is going to burn in hell. And she lives with that. She lives with that to this day.
Right.
She's, she puts a smile on her face and she does her best to be a good grandma and this and that. But if you ask her the truth, that's what she's thinking. She wishes not that I'd never been born, but that she had never been born because she is in some way culpable. And that's pretty crazy. That's pretty crazy. And it just, to me, it exemplifies this whole idea of like what, like let's salvage Christianity. Let's kind of try to keep the good parts. Like this worldview it's poison. I mean, it's kind of like, if you buy raw milk that hasn't been pasteurized and homogenized, you get the milk, but you get that thick cream on top. And it's like, okay, if you could instead replace that with like a vial of poison with this, it's like a candy coating on top and it's poison on the bottom. It's like, that's what Christianity has become to me. Like, yeah, there's a candy
Yeah.
coating on top. And if you want to become a progressive Christian and kind of just be like gentle Jesus, meek and mild, and that's it. And hell is either annihilation or in the end, love wins and the Rob Bell stuff. And eventually, we're all going to end up in heaven. But it's a candy coating on the top, but the vial is full of poison. And to me, like I'm not looking to salvage Christianity. I don't see it as something that's salvageable. I think it needs
Yeah.
to end. And
Right.
I do describe it as I'm not here to redeem or reform Christianity. I escaped it, and I'm just here to help other people who are in prison. In my words, they're in prison. They've got the key in their hands, but they don't know it. They don't even know that they're in a prison. They've been blindfolded, and they need the blindfold off. They need to see that they're in a prison. They need to look at their hand and see you've got a key right in your hand. Do you want to take it? Use it or not? And
Right.
so it's pretty intense. The outcome for this, and I'm my story is intense, but I've heard enough other people's stories to know I'm not that bizarre of a story. There's a lot of
Yeah.
other people going through similar stuff or worse. And JWs, of course, like you don't even talk to them. Like they're just like, you
Right.
don't
Yep.
exist.
Mhm.
But I did want to make sure clarified two things. I wanted to disagree with you directly on two things if I could, in a
Cool.
graceful
Yeah.
sense. You
Beautiful.
said
Good.
you don't consider yourself a cult survivor. I would highly
Yeah.
disagree. And
Yeah.
number two, you said your brain is broken. I would I would think I'm speaking for a lot of people and saying your brain is beautiful and your brain is definitely not broken. Your brain is awesome. And I think what you've gone through proves that I don't think you're broken at all. I think you've gone through stuff. Your brain has served you well. So I'm
I
very grateful that you have the character and the mindset you did.
I appreciate that. I fully accept that. And you're right in both cases. And for my two audiences, I guess in my mind, there's the other people who are like me, who, for whatever twist of fate, are unable to just sit down and shut up and accept it, and have to keep wondering, even as they're sitting down and shutting up and accepting it. Like their brain is still working away on the questions. And so for those people, I would never say your brain is broken. Like, no, your brain is working. Like that's the problem. That's the struggle. Is that your brain is working fine. So I would never say that to them, but I think I do try to hold space for as much of my accuser's accusations as possible that would, one, not necessarily be a lie, but also hold the door open for, like, if you think I'm wrong, like, cool, I think I'm wrong too. Like that doesn't have to be a break in our relationship. Like we can still talk. Maybe I'm wrong. Like you can convince me. And so I want to stay as open. And so probably I should rethink some of that vocabulary, because I wouldn't want to project that onto people who are like me. But I also want to keep the door open to people who hate me, because some days I do too. So you're not wrong. Like I'm a hateable person on many accounts. So but I do want to keep the door open for love and compassion, which is, if I have a life mission, I guess it
Yeah.
would be something along those lines.
That's awesome. There's a guy that I don't know if you've come across him yet, David Ames. He runs, I think it's Deconversion Anonymous, but he talks a lot about secular grace and how important
Mm.
it is. And I think that's a great reminder that just because even if we're dead right, like we might be completely right as far as we can tell with the evidence that, atheism is the most accurate perception of reality, doesn't mean we have to turn into jerks over it. And, we can
Yeah.
truly and we should be able to, as maybe they can't do, we should be able to have a conversation, even a very heated one. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, like let's go out for pizza and have it, still smile at each other and give each other a hug goodnight. And yeah,
Right.
it's so important. Well, I know.
Well,
I'm
real
sorry,
quick,
man.
if I can add in one thing to that too, I also want to make sure that I affirm that there is a space for all of that, uh, vehement, the angry atheists, like someone, the people who are in jail need someone to visit them and say I love you, but also someone needs to say, dude, what you did, you can't, you're out of society. You're like, so someone needs to be the angry, someone needs to represent the victims, and that person should not do that kindly. So I'm fully in favor of the angry atheists, who are indignant about the injustice, and the damage that is done. So I in no way, again, would want to project my current view, my current purpose, my current expansive love view on anyone who's in the place of like, oh no, my purpose is to make sure that everyone understands how sick and twisted this thing is, because it is sick and twisted. So I affirm that mission and that attitude as well, as long as we're all being honest and we're trying not to overstate our confidence, because I think that's where things go terribly wrong on both sides, is saying that you're certain about things that you're not certain about, or that you can't be certain about. So, but there's a place for all of it.
Yeah, agreed. And to have the humility to say we we took 43 years to, both of us took 43 years to get to this point. Arguably there's going to be some other changes in our mindsets, and certainly at least in our emotions and our psychology. Well, I did want to maybe wrap up by giving you a chance to plug your book. I know that we could have interviewed at any point, but we're kind of timing this in a sort of with the fact that your book is coming out shortly. Could you clarify for us, for anyone that's watching this interview shortly after we publish it, when will your book come out, or for those who watch it later, when did it come out? But when is your book coming out? And then if you could just, for anything that I know we probably touched on some of the topics, but if you could just give us an overview for those of people that can pick it up, what would they see in the book? And kind of what was, if you could also step back and say, what was your motivation, besides what we've talked about for doing it? You could have been quiet about this and gone softly into the deconstructed night, but you chose to create a platform, as it were. Why did you feel the need to speak up?
Yeah. Yep, lots of great questions. So first of all, I'm hoping that in January of 2024, it will be released. And as far as what's in it, like if you've made it this far into the interview, you're gonna love it. Unless you've hated me so far and you've just enjoyed arguing with me in your head. In that case, you're gonna love it, because you get to keep on doing that. It's just a lot of the same stuff. It's just my attempt to be honest with myself about the things that are messed up about the worldview that I came from, and the reasons that I can no longer get myself to the same type of belief that I used to have. So it's entitled Dear Evangelicals. I'm not stupid enough to think that any evangelicals are actually going to read it, but it is addressed to them. It is written to them because my sincere goal is, again, not my sincere goal. The tone of the book is the same as the tone of my life, and that is, here's the answers that I've gotten, and here's the questions that I have, and I welcome your response to any of these things. As it turns out, so far in my experience, there aren't Christian answers to most of the things, and there are secular answers to almost all of these things. And that's it's depressing to find out that there are answers to things that you had put in the list of, here's what I'm going to ask God when I get to heaven. And so it's an invitation to evangelicals. I have had a couple evangelicals who've read the book, been beta readers for the book, and they've started their own deconstruction process after reading it. Like, oh, I didn't realize, like, I wasn't told all this stuff. Now I need to go back and research. Thanks a lot for all the homework. Now I got to find out whether or not I'm supposed to turn my life upside down. And that kind of weighs heavy on me. Like, I don't want to be responsible for that, but also we should all be allowed to be honest about what we think. And hopefully I'm wrong about all of it, and eventually I just unpublish the thing and all 450 pages of it's just BS. But at the moment, this is where I currently stand. So I think the actual audience for the book is people who are going through deconstruction, who are feeling alone and feeling like, maybe I'm the crazy one. Maybe I'm not smart enough to question Josh McDowell. How dare I take on C.S. Lewis? And maybe I'm just too stupid. Then the book, I think, will help you realize that there's not only your questions are valid, but there's a lot more questions behind that, and just kind of like help evolve a person down that road of like, okay, well, if you're going to go down this road, here's what's coming for you. And And then of course there's the atheists who are and I say that I say that with a tone, still a Christian tone of derision. there's like the people who are angry at evangelicals, at Christianity, who read it and find great pleasure in all of the baloney that is written in there, and I can appreciate that too. So who I've addressed it to and was actually going to find value in it, I think, are two different audiences. But and it's written, it's 450 pages, but it is broken down into like 2-page segments. Like, here's the story of Nicodemus. Here's the problems with that. Here's the ideas of heaven. Here's something that's wrong with that. So it's broken down into much smaller sections. So you can just flip to the section that you want or that you have questions about and read through a couple little segments. You don't have to go through the whole thing in order. But yeah, that's essentially what it is. And like, I don't feel like I wrote this book. I didn't set out to write it. It's just, this is the collection of things, and they all piled up. And so I decided to put them in order, because as I've shared my story with other people have been like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, of course. And then we both go searching for some evangelical pastor who will please engage with this topic. Please, is there an answer for this? Well, no, there's not. So it goes in the book. So it's just a long collection of those things. Sincere questions from a reluctant deconstructionist. I think that's who I am, and that's what you're going to find in the book.
Of course, the chances are good too. I would guess that maybe a Bible college apologetics class will use it as a textbook for how to answer those crazy agnostics and atheists. Go through it one by one.
Sign me up. Like, whatever the tuition is, I'll pay to attend that class. Like, pick it apart. Please tell me where it's wrong. Yeah, absolutely. And the whole first part of the book is an invitation to evangelicals. Like, I'm open to being wrong about this stuff. Yeah, pick it apart. And worst case scenario, again, like my ideal world, I don't know what that is. In the world that we have, Christianity exists, and it's probably not going anywhere, it would seem. So there's, from my perspective, trying to abolish Christianity or fix Christianity, get rid of it, like that's not happening. So my favorite Christians are the Christians who don't hold to the fundamentals of Christianity very strongly, who are wise enough to be moral, ethical human beings, despite what their book tells them to do, and what their pastor tells them to do. Like those are the good ones. Those are the good people. So for those people, like, if you run a good church, whatever that means, I won't get into that. If you run a good church and you've got good people coming and you're all loving each other and you're helping other people, whether it's Scientology or Mormonism or Christianity, people are exiting your church like crazy. Everyone is leaving church these days. And so, like, at least read this book with a lot of pity in your heart for my lost soul, and at least find out what some of us are thinking. Because so far you've said you've stopped believing in God because you want to live your own sinful life, because you're prideful, because you think that you're smarter than everybody else. You've made all these accusations, but here are all the real reasons we're leaving your church. So at least take a look into my brain. My soul is lost already, but at least you can take advantage of that by reading this and finding out what we actually think, and then addressing the issues. They're going to keep more people in your church instead of fleeing. So yeah, use it for whatever you can use it for. I don't even know this is right.
Yeah, I think I can see you definitely have a stronger graciousness even than I would want. I think I try to be gracious to some things, but I just to be honest, and I say this a little bit snarkily to people like the Christians, if that situation were real, but if they were to take a book like yours or any of the others that would fall in that category and use it for apologetics, to try to take it apart and say, let's prove where he's wrong. Yeah. And they were to invite me to such a class, to debate with them, my answer in part would simply be, you're disqualified from worldview discussions. This isn't a discussion where I need to hear from you. If you start with the premise that there is a God who, again, likes to cut off the end of little boys' penises, and the end result is this is a human sacrifice, blood magic, death cult focused on scapegoating, I'm sorry, but you're disqualified. Like, your opinion, I don't give Christians platforms on this platform pretty much, or even in my own mind and life, because to me, if you allow any of that stuff, it's not a stumbling block because it's true. It's a stumbling block because it's idiotic, and it's mythology, and it's really toxic. And like, I don't I don't want them to have any free real estate, as they like to say, in
Yeah.
my head. I don't think they deserve a platform,
Yeah.
both in terms of an actual platform or in terms of debating. I think, and that's one of the things that I love about what this channel has kind of focused on evolving to do, is to say, we're not here to question, is Christianity possibly still true?
Right.
We're here to say we know that these claims are bogus. So how
Mm.
do we heal from it?
Yeah.
Like I know there's a place for people to have call-in shows and stuff where atheists call in and have your objections. The
Yeah.
Matt Dillahunty kind of stuff. Let's argue about it.
Yep.
Is God really good? And is the Bible really true? But I think there's a place too to say, for those of us that have escaped and said, you know what, we're kind of done. We're kind of done. It's like Richard Dawkins. He was asked, why don't you debate the 6-day creationist much? He's like, the same reason I wouldn't debate people about
Yeah.
the stork theory of reproduction. Like, it's just it's so bizarre. It's not worth my time. And I feel like I'm at that spot. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have different experiences, and it's interesting to hear you talk because like all of your sentences, like, yep, I'm fully on board with 100% of that. Um, yeah, and there isn't any point. I think that's part of my personal where I currently am in my journey, and the next step, I don't know what that'll look like, but um, like there isn't any point in debating with them, and so that's where like for my book, what I've written is like I'm not trying to change your mind, like, but here's what's wrong, like here's why I can't get there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's in that way. I think a lot of evangelicals would take it as a hateful book of anti-Christian rhetoric or whatever. But it's just like here's all the stuff laid out. Like I don't know how am I supposed to know this and also accept what you're saying? Yeah, your all of your arguments are built on a lots of presuppositions that I can't get myself to. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And arguably too, even if there were theoretical good answers that you have to study
Mhm.
for years and years and years to find, like, how does little old grandma who can't read Greek and Hebrew and she
Yeah.
can't read these deep philosophy books, how does she get answers to this? And why doesn't God just make it clear in the first place? And just, yeah, it goes on and on. But I do want
Yeah,
to,
he's the greatest. Sorry, go
okay.
ahead.
No,
I was
please.
gonna say he's the greatest elitist in the universe. If this whole thing is like we say that it's for the poor and the meek and all those people, but if one of those meek persons raises their hand to ask a question, the immediate answer is you're not smart enough. No, you're not smart enough to be a good Christian. So shut up and get back in your place. Like God, if God can only be understood and really fully appreciated by the smartest people in the universe, well, I'm out anyway. I might as well sit here as a damned atheist because I'm not one of those people. I need if Christianity is real, I need it to be accessible by stupid people like me. Again, I wouldn't put other people like me in my position, but yeah,
Hmm.
it's a weirdly elitist religion when you say, oh, the only reason you don't believe is because you're not smart enough to, and also it's for all the stupid people. Man, okay, that
It
sounds a
is.
lot like a cult.
It
Sounds a
does.
lot like a cult.
And if you leave, there's hell to pay. Well,
Right?
I
Yeah.
just wanted to add to, just before we do a final wrap up, and this is not a question, but it's more of a statement. It's so cool to hear that you're able to raise your kids without this. And obviously, I'm doing my best to protect my kids' minds. But like, isn't it just so beautiful to be able to raise children without this garbage, and just for them to have the
Yeah.
chance at reality? They're still going to get caught up in different things. They're still going to, date the wrong person. They're still going to make mistakes. They're still going to have bad days, but at least they've got a fighting chance at reality, as opposed to truly thinking this stuff is the be all and end all of their lives. I mean, it's such a beautiful thing. And
Yeah.
it breaks my heart that I didn't get that chance, but it's a beautiful thing to still kind of be able to give them a much better chance at their lives, and hopefully, a fighting chance at them having beautiful lives without this stuff, and being able to hopefully, you know, we used to talk a lot in Christianity about breaking generational curses, and I know that's not real,
Right.
but it's like if you could take that concept and transfer it, it's like there is a generational curse, as it were. It's
Yes.
Christianity, and I'm breaking the curse.
Yeah. Everyone before me had a mind virus, and now I've gotten an antidote for it, and so yeah, I don't have to pass that same mind virus on. Unfortunately they've got lots of other negative traits from me, but this mind virus isn't going to be one of them, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. We all do. We all got our closets. Well, Before we wrap up, did you have any final thoughts you wanted to add?
No, I just really appreciate the conversation with you and what you're doing and you being honest with yourself and with the world. I got a lot of respect for. Obviously, we connected because of the book, and some of my beta readers told me that you'd be a good person to interact with. But then getting into watching a lot of your videos and stuff, seems like you're coming from a really sincere, honest place, and I got a lot of love and respect for that. So thanks.
Thank you very much for saying that. I'm glad they connected us. That's ditto. So glad that you're doing what you're doing. On that note, I'll just add this. I think you should consider when the dust settles from your book, unless you have like another book on the agenda right after that, I think you should seriously consider in the next year or two whether a new YouTube channel focused on this is in your future. It's you'd be very good at it. You've got a great voice for doing this stuff and a great demeanor. So consider it. I don't say that too often, but I would say about every 20, 30 interviews, I tell the person, like, yeah, this you need to consider a bigger platform. Your platform does not need to stay stagnant. You need to grow. But I'll be if it ever happens, and you need some help to try to spread the word, let me know.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, I'll just wrap up by saying we've been speaking with Jamin Coller. Jamin, thank you so much. For everyone that's able to proceed to connect with Jamin, I'll have the links beneath this video for his websites and YouTube channels and for the Amazon page. But Jamin, thanks so much. Great to hear your story. Great to get to know you.
Thanks, Tim.
Have a great day.